Okay, Kitsiksimatsimokboa. This is going to be part two of my two-part lecture on happenings during the fourth winter lunar cycle, Kattoi, when people need help eating. It's a starvation time. And I will apologize in advance for any background noise that may occur during this recording. It is a busy afternoon for my birds, my magpies and crows here, and I wouldn't be surprised if they start talking again pretty soon. In any case, I believe we left off at part one somewhere around this slide with the generic name Xuawakatsi for spiders, and the specific name in this case, the thin-legged wolf spider, one of the early species who emerges as we begin to move toward our thaw. I often find these species along sandstone cliff areas in the coulees near the river. The river itself at this time should be starting to change. We should start seeing new pockets and pools of water opening up. And this can create some danger because they can be very deceptive. I had to walk right close to this pool here, which was a fairly deep pool, before I noticed it. And had I been on the ice instead of the shore, I might have walked too close to the thin edge. So this is a time when you might want to double think whether to continue crossing the river ice if you have been, or crossing streams or lakes, ponds, what have you. And if you do, at least to be very conscious of the possibility of running into thin ice, being prepared for that. There's a Blackfoot word, sopochtistoturs. Sopochtistoturs is to be prepared, but underlying that concept is a verb root that refers more to asking questions. Asking questions. So being prepared means having some questions in mind, like, is the ice too thin today to walk on? You know? Sopochtistoturs. So just be careful. But don't be so careful that you stay away from those open pools, because those open pools can be revealing as things begin to thaw. New patterns of activity emerge, and if you watch the thawing edges of the river, you will see different animals visiting the open waters, because things begin happening immediately. There's insect activity around the edges of these waters very soon after they begin to open up. There's a midge hatching that I'm aware of, and we get the Isocapnia stoneflies on the ice. And we also get animals that just want to access water, which is what I think we see happening here in this slide. This is an open crag of the river right along the edge of a cut bank. A lot of plant growth coming off the cut bank, and on the snow, on the ice, you can see footprints. Most of those prints, those tracks, belong to the animal that made this landing. You see that diamond shape toward the back behind the wings. That is indicative of this Omahkitoki, ringneck pheasant. This, of course, is an introduced species, but it's been categorized as a kitoki, as a type of kitoki in the Blackfoot language. And in the taxonomy, kitokis are basically game birds, with the prototypical kitoki being the sharp-tailed grouse. Although up here, everybody refers to them in English as prairie chickens, they are not the true prairie chickens of the Dakotas as far as ornithologists are concerned. These are sharp-tailed grouse up here that people call Kiitokiks and Blackfoot or prairie chickens in English. The Blackfoot name given to the pheasant, Omahkiitoki, the big Kiitoki. And pretty much throughout Blackfoot territory, you're going to find these guys. Whether you're rural, whether you're urban. I know a lot of my students that were studying at one time out along the Bullhorn area and in Farm 4 had lots of these ringneck pheasants at their sites, and certainly I do as well. They got a strong presence. This is a male. Females are more camouflaged. Males more showy. They're really the peacocks of my natural world. And they like eating berries, seeds, and such. It's their main food supply. They stick around year long, and they eat the rose hips. And this winter, I learned that they ate, or that they do eat, the berries off of the buckbrush, which there's plenty of. Some of the plants that stick out this time of the season, you might see these old stalks of common mullein. Mullein, I believe, has many different uses, but the most common one that I'm aware of is the use of the leaves as a smoking agent for clearing up or at least settling lung issues. If people have a cough that is persistent and deep, it seems counterintuitive, but the recommendation is to smoke the leaves of common mullein. And these leaves are big, warm, fuzzy leaves during the summer season. Winter season, of course, you don't want to pick any plant material, save for maybe some roots. Roots are okay for the most part to harvest in the winter if you get opportunities to access through the frost layer. But for the most part, plants are not. Once things get dry at the beginning of winter, you get different kinds of molds and things that can be dangerous growing on plants. So I don't recommend using wintertime plant greens or, for the most part, fruits, but there's some exceptions, and one of those I'll talk about today. I guess I'll talk about more than one. Here's an exception. Guinea, the prickly rose. Prickly rose, you can definitely eat these all through the winter. The rose hips that still look good. And if you get days when the temperature is above zero, sometimes the rose hips are still squishy enough to pop the seeds out without much effort. Though I find for the most part they've lost some of their moisture, and you gotta kind of eat them and separate the seeds from the flesh with your teeth. Spit out the seeds because the seeds give itchy bum. I believe I've talked about that in a previous lecture, the Napi story where he eats guinea and gets an itchy bum. So you don't want that, but it is an important source of vitamin C and pretty tasty too. So we have 3 different species of guinea in the Blackfoot. They're all just called guinea, but the one that has a stem like this with all of these thorns is called prickly rose. We also have Canada rose and prairie rose, common names, which others may know some other names for them, but I call the 3. Canada rose is about the same size as prickly rose, but without the thorns, not without this many thorns. And the prairie rose is what I refer to as the rose that grows, an inch off the ground. Prickly rose get some galls, and those are very, visual during the winter, contrasting against the snow as you walk past the plants. So here's a prickly rose with 2 different kinds of galls. One of them forms this kind of flowerish pine cone looking growth. and another forms a faux berry. So it's interesting that that these kind of galls, which are created by insects, of course. I don't remember for the roses what the name of these two different insects that creates these two particular galls are. I think one is a midge, but I'm not sure which. In any case, I find it interesting that the galls form in imitation of something the plant might otherwise have, something like a flower, something like a berry. Another winter berry, it's good to eat, is a plant that has two names in both languages, two common names. In English, this is silverberry or wolf willow. In Blackfoot, this is Mississemi Sois and Upsea. Upsea refers to a white berry, basically. It's referring to the white one. Mississemi Sois is more descriptive. And what this basically says, it's the shit willow. The shit willow. Why is it called that? Well, this goes back to another Napi story. Just like Guinea had a Napi story, so does this one. In this Napi story, Napi is hanging out around, we'll call them gophers, but they're Richardson's ground squirrels. This is another, technicality where the common language up here doesn't fit what the scientists would call them. Just like with the prairie chicken, the scientists call them, the ones here, sharp-tailed grouse. Everybody knows them as prairie chicken. So too gophers, right? So Napi's hanging out with some gophers. And the gophers play this game where a bunch of them will jump into the ashes of a fire that still has some heat in there, some coals. And they'll cover themselves up with the ashes. And when it gets too hot, they'll yell to be uncovered, and the ones that are outside will dig them out and allow them out. This was the game that they were playing in Napi's time. Today, the gophers play a different game, just as dangerous, where they basically play chicken with the cars on the highways. But in Napi's time, they played their danger game in the fire pit. And Napi saw what they were playing, and he thought it looked fun, and he asked if he could play. But the gophers told him it's really a dangerous game. We don't want to be responsible for you getting hurt. So Napi says, well, what if I'm the guy on the outside, right? To start off, why don't I start off there till I learn the game? And then it won't be so dangerous. So, all right, that makes sense. But, you have to be ready to dig us out of there, because when we call, it's getting too hot. We could die. And Napi's like, no problem. I saw how you guys were doing it. I can dig you out. I can probably dig you out quicker than any of these other gophers, So they gave him a shot. They all climbed in and covered themselves up with ashes, except for pregnant females stayed out of the game. And Napi waited for them to start calling, but just before they did start to call, he was, he could smell the roasting beginning to take place. And he thought, that smells kind of good. And then he heard the first calls, but he didn't respond right away. And he kept kind of smelling as the roasting continued. He thought, maybe this game is not so important to me. And he ended up roasting those gophers. And so he had himself a really good meal. Once they were roasted, he pulled them out of the coals and stripped them down, ate his fill, and he still had a bunch of gophers left. So he cut these willow sticks and he made this mat out of willow sticks. And he laid his gophers out on that willow stick mat to dry in the sun, while he himself figured he'd take a nap. But before he went to sleep, he told his ass, says, "Hey, if anything comes around and tries to eat my gophers, you've got to alert me right away." So he goes to sleep. A little while later, a raven flies past. And Napi's ass notices this raven flying past. And it starts farting and farting. Napi wakes up. What? He's all ready to defend himself. And by this time, the raven's already passed and flown on. So Napi says, why did you wake me up? I was sleeping really good. Don't wake me up again unless there's really something, a danger to my gophers. So he goes back to sleep. Sometime later, a bobcat comes up. And the bobcat is following the smell of the gophers. And he just starts eating. So Napi's ass is just blowing away, just farting and farting. And Napi wakes up, or Napi hears it, but he doesn't, he kind of tells himself, this is the same thing. It's going to be a false alarm, not a big deal. He keeps sleeping, and the bobcat eats all his fill, eats all the gophers, and then wanders away. Napi's ass continues to kind of reluctantly fart, trying to get him to wake up, and eventually he does. He wakes up. He says, What already? And then he looks over and he sees there's no gophers on his willow mat. Now he's jumping up. Now he's mad, hey? So he's looking around, and he thinks he finds a trail coming from his mat. He follows it, and it leads him to the bobcat. And the bobcat, just like Napi, is all fat from the gophers and laid out on a rock in the sun and sleeping. So Napi sneaks up on him and grabs him by his hind legs and starts smashing, like whipping him like a towel by his hind legs and smashing his face into the rock. And this is how the bobcat's face gets smashed so tightly. And this is also how his hind legs get stretched so far. And then Napi takes some of his own pubic hair and slaps it onto the face of the bobcat, and that creates the bobcat's curly whiskers. So Napi, really pays that bobcat back. And then he starts walking toward his camp again, and he thinks, it's my ass's fault as much as anything that those gophers got eaten. My ass needs to pay a price too. So when he gets back to his camp, he takes some sticks out of the fire, and he starts burning his asshole with it. And of course he's like burning, he's torturing himself, branding his asshole with the burning stick and screaming and branding again. It's, passing out, screaming, and wakes up, he's burning. And so he puts his ass up in the air. He sticks his head between his legs and he starts calling for the wind to pity him, come and blow his ass as hard as he can because it's so on fire. And so the wind starts blowing, and Napi's like, yes, very soothing, more. I need more. So the wind blows harder and harder, and Napi keeps calling for more. And finally the wind's just like hurricane winds, and Napi's can't even stay on his feet. He starts rolling around in this wind. He's grabbing plants, trying to hold on to himself. And eventually he grabs this one plant that doesn't uproot, and he flaps on the edge of that brush like a flag in the air. Napi does, until the wind dies down. And then he's mad at the plant. You spoiled my fun. And he takes his knife and he cuts the plant, makes all kinds of slices, and it just goes berserk. It's a madman. So that plant that he cut up is the black birch, and it still has the marks, the scars from being cut. And the willow that he put the gophers on to dry in the sun, well, that willow is still greasy if you peel its bark. And then the one that he burned his ass with is this plant, Mississami soyis, the shit willow. And the reason it's called that is because when you burn this plant now, it smells like shit. It smells like Napi's ass. It didn't used to in the past, but ever since Napi, it smelled like shit when you burn it. So it's kind of a joke. People will, if they want to mess with somebody, they might go into their lodge and throw a piece of this Mississami soyis in the fire and make the whole lodge smell like ass. But its primary use is for the berries. It has a nice, well, I can't call it a nice, it's almost like a sweet, chalky berry. The pit, the seed, is football shaped and striped with color, and people used to use it for beads. It's one of the original beads. The berry is also used for part of the tanning agent when tanning guts. Like if you take a bladder from a bison and you're making a bladder bag, you would blow the bag full of air, tie it up, and leave it like a kind of a balloon to dry. And once it's dry, you cut that end off where it was tied up, and you make a paste. You boil a paste of these berries and coat it all over inside and out of that bag and slowly work that bag till it's soft. Mississami soyis. So this is one of the winter berries. Of course, you always have some bullberries that stick through the season, and the animals that like to eat them. Simit Sim, the Bohemian waxwing we've had all winter. And you may notice as I go into the lectures coming out of winter that some of the animals I'm introducing and talking about are the same that I talked about or introduced earlier in the winter. That's because I used to teach this course as a 3-semester course year-round. So I used to do a semester in September to December, and then January till April, and then through the summer. So people that were starting getting January time around this time of year, Kattoi, may not have been introduced to some of these animals. So I introduced them again, the Bohemian waxwing. I won't go into details about them again for this course. You should already have some of that introduced from previous moons. This is a group of Simit Sim. The raccoons, Sikoapspa, the black eyes. Again, what's interesting with these guys is that most mammals, especially mammals of this size, would be represented in Blackfoot bundles if they were abundant here in the past. I've never seen a raccoon in a bundle. And so I wonder how long they've been here. I've never heard of raccoons in a Blackfoot story, you know. But one would think the Rocky Mountains, Montana, Alberta, would be a natural zone for raccoons. Perhaps not the case. Perhaps raccoons have been synanthropic for far longer than we've known, and on the West Coast, where villages were more sedentary, maybe they thrived, you know. Not so much here, where people moved around. This is an old bike ramp in the forest where you can see some raccoons have bedded down for the colder part of the lunar cycle Kato. Got a berry storage in there with them. The European starling. You may have some of these at your site, especially if you're in an urban area. You might have some stick around all winter. They'll be one of the species earliest to return as well in summer. And this is an introduced species. It was brought to New York and released during a Shakespeare in the Park exhibit. I forget the year, but it didn't take them long to spread out through all of North America. And most people, most Napiquakes see them as a pest. I never see any animal or plant as a pest myself. I think European starlings have fit into our ecology far better than most introduced human beings. So I would say leave the starlings and kick out the complainers. The Blackfoot name that I've given it is Ikitsixini, which means the small black bird from across the ocean. One of my students, when I was at Red Crow College, did a senior thesis work researching with some of the elders to rename or give new names to species that hadn't been here before that are now. One of the species they dealt with was this European starling. But the elders had categorized it as a kind of crow. They'd categorized, the elders that worked on the project categorized it as a kind of a crow, and they had categorized also a rusty blackbird in that project as a kind of a crow. Perhaps because they were small dark birds, but also perhaps because they were not aware of the older words for smaller blackbirds. The word for crow is mate still. The word for a cowbird, which is a small blackbird, is xini. And the word for a red-winged blackbird is amaxixina. And the word for a yellow-headed blackbird is soyixina. So I would categorize a starling as a kind of xini, if anything. If it was good, and it really isn't even a blackbird, but taking the lead from the elders, wanting to bring it into the Blackfoot taxonomy, I would call it a xini. And their choice was to call it the across the ocean crow. So I'm using the same here. Ikit is across. So Ikitsixini, the across the ocean blackbird. And these guys are insect eaters par excellence. They get along very well in just about any environment. Though because they eat insects, not too many stick around in the north during the winters. Some do, and so you might see some at your site. Nipomaquis, the black-capped chickadees, are another one of our birds that sticks around all winter. And this bird too has a Blackfoot story, which I can't remember whether I've introduced in a prior lecture for the winter yet or not. So I think I'll quickly go through that story just in case. The Blackfoot word for is nipomaki, which must have something to do with the summer. Nipo is leafing out, and that's the word that's used to refer to the summer season. Nipomaki. In any case, this is another situation where Napi observed these birds playing a game that he wanted to play, and they warned him, you don't know how to play our game. It's dangerous. The game that they played, what they would do is they would throw their eyes. They would say, ni pomaki, and they'd throw their eyes out to a distant log or tree. And I think what they would say was, Bachi pomaki, and their eyes would come back. It's like mistaken ni pomaki or something like that. So they would throw their eyes out to a distant spot, call their eyes back in, and Napi thought this looked like fun. So they told him, all right, well, if you play this game, here's how you do it, but we're warning you, if you do this too many times in a row, you lose your eyes, they don't come back. 4 times is the limit. If you do that, if you do it more than that, you're gonna lose your eyes for sure. So, of course, Napi goes along and he decides he's gonna try it. Finds a distant, stump he wants to put his eyes on, and uses the magic word, ni pomaki, and his eyes fly over there, and he can see over there really clearly, and then Bachi pomaki, and they all come back. I think it's Bachi. Might be Bachki pomaki. No, I think it's Bachi pomaki. They come back. So he's, went on a little ways. He had fun that time. He's made him smile. He enjoyed it. So does it again, And it's not long before Napi's doing it. He's already done his 4 times and he forgot and he thinks he's on number 4 and he throws his eyes again. Ipomaki, and they fly out there and you can see. And he says, Bachipomaki, and his eyes don't come back. Now he can't see. And so he starts, feeling his way over there to where he knows his eyes were. And he tries, he's rooting around all over the place. And he can't find his eyes. For everything he tries, he can't find his eyes. And he's left with no eyes. He starts wandering the landscape, looking for help. He's got no eyes, and eventually Coyote notices, this guy's acting strange. Coyote thinks maybe he can take advantage of him. So he goes up to Napi and asks him, what are you up to? And Napi tells him, oh, can you help me? Can you help me? I'm hurt. Can you help? And so the Coyote comes close, and Napi grabs him and steals his eyes. Steals the Coyote's eyes. And that's why Napi, for the rest of his life after that, had the blue eyes. Okay? So, ni pomakiks. And this is something that there's a kind of an inner read to this story. Because sometimes when a guy is with his friend and he notices his friend is eyeballing a girl that's not his wife, looking at a girl too hard, he'll tell his friend, Bachi pomaki, bring your eyes back. Don't do that too much or you lose your eyes. Ni pomaki's really close friend is Bachbaksisi, the downy woodpecker. I know we've talked about them before. I know we've also talked about Kakanotstokiks, who should be at or very near their nesting tree during the lunar cycle Katoi. So you should try to find these couples because they become very important in the next lunar cycle Pitaki. They should start nesting. And it's only by watching them to see whether or not they nest that one can determine whether or not it is actually a Pitaki or whether this year is the year with Sametsiki a deceptive moon, the 13th weird moon that comes in deceptively every 3rd, 4th year. You just don't know when. unless you're watching these owls. So try to find, if you can, the owls in your area, and that might require going out at night in the early, evening after it's dark and listening for their calls. During Gato, you should be able to hear both the male and female calling back and forth to one another. Female, if you find the couple, the female will be the larger one. And the calls that they give after dark, the male goes, ooh, 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 ooh. And the female goes, ooh, 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 in response. Also in the forest is, of course, the owl's favorite food. This is a nest in an open crag in a poplar tree. And the nest, look up closely, it's a lot of deer hair and bark fragments, this and that. This is the nest of a deer mouse, Ganeskina, who is an arboreal mouse. Very important in Blackfoot culture, but we've talked about him already. What is this? You know what this is. This is Geeskach. Same here. This is an old beaver shore lodge, but there's a continued occupant. Okay. Geeskach, the porcupine. So just some porcupine signs as a refresher. You should still be seeing lots of them because there's no leaves on the trees. They stick out. This is a patch of choke cherries. You can tell right away, even passing at high speeds on the road. Why? Because you'll see the black knot. Yeah, the black knot, a fungus that grows only on the cherry trees. And here in Blackfoot territory, the only cherry tree outside of subdivisions are choke cherries. You also see growths on the poplar trees. You may see on the stems these big balls. These are Diplodia, gall of poplars. Lots of other poplar growth. This is still, I believe, a Diplodia. This is where one tree had fallen over, rested against a living tree, and become enveloped in its bark. Awatuik, the white-tailed deer, reside in the forest. Even this far into the winter, the forest cycle, they'll still retain their antlers. We should see them falling off very soon, and you may be able to find antlers in your area. If you start looking toward the end of Katoi on, a lot of rodents rely on the antlers, the shed antlers, for some of their nutrition. Lots of tools in the past were made by antlers. Awatoi, by the way, refers to the way that the tail moves on the white-tailed deer when it flicks back and forth as he's running away. One of the behaviors that I see during Katoi, especially when there's a lot of snow, is the whitetail will come out of the brush up onto the stubble fields. Typically, they don't do this throughout the other part of the year. Whitetails are the deer that really like a lot of tight brush. But the herds will move up, and I think they do this because the snow, navigating the snow and the ice down in the river bottom this time of year is just more difficult than chancing it out in the exposed open areas. Sometimes you can find herds of hundreds out on the prairies this time of year. Another deer you'll find on the prairies and on the coulee slopes is The Sikotoi, the mule deer. It's our other primary deer species. Yeah, I see them mainly on the coulee slopes. Again, they still got their antlers, and they're traveling in herds. Sometimes I will find these guys down in the coulee forest this time of year, but mostly on the slopes. You can see among them, they're moving in and around these darker plants. This is the skunk brush sumac, who will revisit especially during the summer when its berries are ripe. But one of the things you can observe here in the winter, if you're looking at the skunk brush sumac, is to get up close to it while it doesn't have leaves and take a look at its stems. You'll see that they have a lot of these orange lichen on them. This lichen is called a pincushion orange because it forms these little cushions, or what look like cushions. And this is a calcium-loving lichen that grows on these plants mostly because the birds come and eat the berries on these plants, and the bird droppings on the stems provide the calcium that the lichens enjoy. One of the birds that visits these plants during the winter quite often will be common redpolls. I'll see them hanging around on some of the old skunk brush, even when there's not too much for berries remaining to pick. They might use it just as a lookout post for some other plants that they're visiting, like sunflowers, or just this past lunar cycle Gutto, I saw redpolls in my area eating catnip seeds. This is one of our winter birds, the redpoll. And I don't have a Blackfoot name for these guys yet, but eventually I'll create one. This is the prairie sunflower. When the elders were asked its Blackfoot name, they came up with Nato Sapistiskisi, sunflower. I don't think that this is an old name. I think this is something recent. And that's it. That's it for Gutto. And that's really that's it for the most intense part of winter. In the next lunar cycle, we can expect life to begin erupting anew. Kian.